Okay, thank you. I am excited to be here and share this with all of you. My name is Christina Grove. I'm Assistant Professor of Philosophy at the University of South Carolina Sumter, one of the Palmetto College campuses of our system. And the presentation in the first session from the Center for Integrative and Experiential Learning really sets up my presentation right now. So I'm excited to get into depth about some very easy things that we can do to make all of our classes higher impact, to promote transformative education, and to build in some experiential opportunities for students no matter what kind of class we're teaching. A few caveats. My background is philosophy. I teach philosophy and Intro to Women's and Gender Studies. So many of my examples will be somewhat humanities focused. But what I want you all to do is to be thinking about ways that you can take what I'm saying to apply the ideas across the curriculum into lots of other different kinds of classes. And I'm really excited to hear about the ideas that you're going to be sharing in the last half of this workshop. So when I talk about high impact practices, I'm getting the idea and the examples from the Association of American Colleges and Universities. And you've got the examples right here. And these are all designated as high impact practices because they have a high impact on deep learning. And by deep learning, we're talking about like the opposite of shallow learning, right? So learning that goes beyond just mere recollection for exams. I'm assuming that a lot of us have had the experience of having students cram for exams or tests or quizzes, do really, really, really well, and then not be able to remember a single darn thing even 10 minutes later. That's not what we're going to call transformational learning or deep learning. That seems to be pretty shallow, and it's not the kind of thing that is going to make someone into a lifelong learner. So what the AACU, there we go. What they've identified as high impact practices are the ones that seem to be most conducive to helping to form our students into lifelong learners by learning better, making deeper connections, and having learning that they can use far beyond the classroom. So we can design whole courses as based on high impact practices, and the presentation right before mine was really helpful in talking about how to involved in designing experiential learning opportunities for students that can be searchable within the bulletin and students can find those. So that's awesome. And I want to focus on a slightly different aspect, which is to think smaller so that things can be even more accessible to more students and to set students up for seeking out those opportunities when they're not really sure why they should, what they entail, etc. So I'm talking about thinking small. I'm talking about high-ish impact, if you will, or higher impact. So if we're thinking about what might keep students from taking experiential courses and what might keep us from designing more, then we might be thinking that whole course thinking is like too big sometimes. And so starting small and working into it might make it a lot easier for more of us to do more and then to build a culture, right, of seeing experiential learning as just being awesome teaching and learning. So here's what I'm seeing as being potential gains from thinking smaller and taking elements from high impact practices and implementing them in any of our courses, even if they're not officially designated as experiential learning courses, service learning courses, etc. So we could normalize integrative and experiential learning at all levels and just say, look, what you want is transformative learning, and even if you don't know you want this, we're telling you you should, because this is the best kind of learning. It just happens, and you integrate what you know across the curriculum and beyond the school, right? It just happens when you create experiences that involve higher order cognitive skills, like applying and analyzing and creating, and that transforms. Smaller amounts of experiential learning might help students to get an idea of what it entails and then to seek it out later on. So students may come into to college, university, especially at the lower levels, and think, okay, I don't even know what this means. And if I don't know what it means, I'm probably not going to do it because that sounds like it's probably hard and scary. So if we build in opportunities for them to have deeply reflective experiences or to create their own experiences around the course material, then we're sort of throwing them in a very, very safe and small way so that they can be like, whoa, that was cool. Hey, I want to do more of it. And the last is that we can get more faculty involved. So most of us feel maybe a small amount of dread when we think about overhauling all of our courses from the ground up. But changing one or two assignments per class per even academic year, that's not so hard. Many of us do that anyway. So by making incremental small changes, we can start pushing our own courses more toward an experience-based sort of a classroom, but gradually, and that might make it easier. That's what I've been doing in my classes. I've been really influenced by the growing trend of teaching philosophy as a way of life, or the way of life approach to teaching philosophy. And so I'm going to transition now to talking about some of the things that I've done in my classes. And here's where I invite you to see what I'm saying I've done and find that or riff on it and come up with ideas of your own. So I used to teach in what might seem like a fairly standard way, midterm and final exams, 2 to 3 short argument papers per semester. Remember, I'm philosophy, so we do arguments all the time. And then the daily preparatory written work that I have students do no matter what. There's an asterisk there because that is the only event that I have kept consistent over the course of the time that I've been teaching. And that's also something I'll be talking about in my next session. So if you're more interested about that, please come to that session and I'll talk about that. These classes were fine, right? And the strongest students did really, really well. The weakest students did okay, but I wanted to see more improvement. Now I've gotten rid of the midterm and final exams and replaced the midpoint and final self-assessments. I used to include that as a small portion of the final exam. Now that's the only thing we do at the midpoint and the end for the most part, and there's no exam associated. Rather than two to three short argument papers, we now have 1 to 2 experiential assignments that include a write-up. Now, I don't call it a paper, I call it a write-up, and somehow their writing is so much better as long as I don't call it a paper. And in the write-up, they get to reflect on how their project demonstrates strong understanding of the course material. So I'm still getting to see how well they understand what we're learning in the course. It's just still always through their experience of the kinds of things we did. What I found is that all students performance in the class has improved. The best students do amazing work, and the weakest students have the biggest gains because they've got much easier ways to get into the course. Here's some of the assignments that I've designed. You know, this might spark some ideas for you. Life experiments. I just finished grading the character aspiration reflections in 2 of my classes, and they're so fun to read. Philosophical conversation, and I call it mostly because I'm in philosophy, but basically just talk to someone not in the course about something in the course and do it outside of course time, and then reflect on how that conversation went. The leisure project is one of my favorites, and it always throws students off when we do it, and they love it by the end. I have them reflect or protect an hour a week for leisure, reflect on that, record it, and then write up a reflection at the end and connect it to how it makes education possible. And then the student selected project, where I give students control over what they're going to do for their final project. And they can do a traditional argument paper or analytic essay, but they can also do creative assignments. So I've gotten oil paintings and watercolors and collages and pencil drawings. I've had students write original songs about the texts. A music video was one of my favorites. This one was really good. So they get to find ways to enter into some sort of relationship with some part of the course material, and then show how what they've done proves to me that they understand the material. And they have a lot of fun doing it, and it gives them some agency by the end of the class to say, look, I'm going to show you what I learned, and I'm going to do it in a way that I like. And so the idea here is that, okay, if high impact practices lead to stronger engagement, deeper learning, transformative education, then we should be able to work backwards and take those goals and then sort of transform our projects or assignments or assessments so that they are achieving those goals or outcomes. So we might not be able to create full-on living and learning communities in all of our classes, but if that's something that's lead to transformative education, then what can we do to build community even just in our own classes? If making connections across the curriculum and beyond the school at all helps students to learn more because they retain more information than if they cram or memorize, then what can we do to incentivize those kinds of connections and to de-incentivize cramming or mere memorization? If reflection and reflective activities are really useful in getting students to become much more engaged with the material, to see it as relevant in their own lives, then what can we do on a small scale to build in room for that kind of reflection in our own classes so that we can do it, again, in small ways that are manageable for us and for our students? Like I said previously, the best student work was even stronger than before. So among the reasons that I've been moving more toward experiential learning is that it's a lot more fun for me. Grading is way more interesting, and it's more interesting for students. And I admit I was a little surprised to find that they all did better in terms of their ability to articulate their understanding of course material simply by shifting the kinds of assignments that I was doing, how I was structuring my classes. In the daily preparatory work that I have students do, and I call it daily because that was when I was teaching face-to-face, I require them to come to class with questions every class period, and that helps them to grow their curiosity skills. But when they're also applying them to materials they're creating, to creative interpretations of the texts that we're reading and the ideas, the themes, their curiosity skills grew even faster because they were finding ways to make connections as opposed to me telling them how to make a connection in a certain way. They got a lot more excited about gains that they were making, and that's just fun to watch, right? I also noticed that while initial stress was higher because they felt less at home in a class without exams and quizzes and things, once they got into it and once they realized there were lots of safety nets and room for safe failure for them, that they did much, much better work because they were freer to take risks, and so they stressed less and trusted the process more. And that was also very exciting. So great, I'm even a little bit more under my time than I thought. So now the rest of the session is for group discussion, and I'm open to questions that are for me specifically, but also I was thinking that we could work sort of mastermind style, and for as long as we have time, we can, whoever's got an idea, just throw it in the chat, and then we'll pick it up from there, and we'll workshop ideas for 2 to 3 minutes, and then move on to the next, and start thinking about ways that we can build higher or ish impact practices in our classes without having to invest tons of time and energy when we don't always have it.